So we're going to continue with our presentations. Our next presentation is by Kaitlin Campbell, supervised by Dr. Isabel Cherney, and the title of the presentation is The Missing Link, the Impact of Single-Sex Education on Girls' Interest in the Physical Sciences and the Potential for Legislative Response.
So sorry for the long title. I'm Kaitlin Campbell, and so this study, I'm just a small part of this study. It's been ongoing for a few years, but I started as a freshman with this, so it's kind of, I've been part of the team to do it, and then I kind of put my own spin on it, kind of with my own interest and my experience this summer, working as an intern, a lobbyist in DC. So what we're basically interested in looking at with this study is the involvement of females in the science, technology, engineering, and math field, which is shortened to STEM. What was one small piece that we could look at with this? Well, I went to a single-sex high school, and so we thought maybe single-sex education for girls would make them more interested in going into the sciences for a career. We also looked at males. But in general, some people kind of ask me, well, why do we want women in the sciences? As anyone who is a woman or has a daughter or a sister or a mother, of course, you want that person or you want yourself to be able to do what you want to do. And if you're good at science and you like science, you would say, why aren't enough women in the sciences? Why aren't there as many women as men in the sciences? We want it to be equal. But I was in DC, I was working with policymakers, and I have to be able to speak to them. But the thing is that no matter if your interest is just for the furthering of society, or if you're the head of a hospital and you want to break through and figure out what the cure for cancer is, or if you're the Secretary of Defense and you're interested in how can we counter this new terrorism strategy or whatever, the basic idea of diversifying any field is that when you have diversity, you have new ideas, new ways of thinking about things, new approaches, new questions, and new conclusions. So this is really the reason that anyone that I speak to, I can tell them why they should be interested in having women in the sciences. So with that kind of introduction, I'll launch into our actual study. So first, I'll discuss the things that we're looking at. So self-esteem. High self-esteem makes someone less likely to conform, they have less stress, they're more persistent at difficult tasks, and they have a greater sense of well-being. And as far as previous research with single-sex education and self-esteem, generally the trend that we see is that single-sex classes in math and physics, the physical sciences, make girls more confident in those sciences. So, here are two examples. With these, though, and the difference between most of the studies and ours is that most studies that are out there on single-sex education, generally they occur with students who are younger than high school, and ours was high school students. And also, they're generally assigned for 1 year or 2 years a single-sex classroom or a co-ed. So ours were different in that way. Pardon me. And then another thing that we're looking at was achievement motivation, and it's kind of the three components of that are work, mastery, and competitiveness. Work is a desire to do well and to do hard work, that you enjoy it. Mastery is preference for difficult tasks, and competitiveness is that you enjoy competition and that you have a desire to kind of do better than the other people around you. And generally, high achievement motivation is correlated with a high GPA. But there wasn't any previous research really on single-sex versus co-education and its correlation with achievement motive, although they had found a rough correlation between high achievement motive, positive self-concept, and female role models, so we thought that could be related. And then the final thing that we were looking at was intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and you're probably pretty familiar with those, but basically intrinsic motivation is positively correlated with academic success because it's a feeling inside yourself why you want to do well. I want to do well because I feel good when I do well. Whereas extrinsic is, maybe someone gives you a piece of candy and you get an A or that kind of thing. And that's generally negatively correlated with academic success. So we expected that females in single-sex environments would have higher self-esteem and that males would have higher self-esteem in co-ed environments because that's what the previous research had found. And we also hypothesized that achievement motivation would be higher for girls in the single-sex schools And also we expected higher intrinsic motivation for students in single-sex schools in general. So our methods, this is a breakdown of the sample that we had. Overall, we had 209 males and 339 females. They were all almost all from Omaha, the schools. 2 single-sex private girls' schools, 2 single-sex private boys' schools, and 3 co-ed schools. And a lot of kind of like the first question that we get asked about the study is, how can you compare private schools and co-ed schools? Usually the co-ed schools are public, but actually only one of the schools that we looked at in this study was a public school, and all the other schools had pretty similar tuition. So that at least was something that we could, that it was pretty equal. And then, so we gave them a 10-minute long math test, which included stereotype threat, but we're not going to talk about that here because it wasn't significant and it's not really what this presentation is about. And then we gave them a survey that was 106 items long, and it had lots of different kinds of questions, open-ended, some with scales, and these are some of the specific scales that we used. So our results. For the math test, we did find a significant result. Basically, all the students in the single-sex schools performed better than the students in the co-ed schools. So here are the single-sex students. Both the males did better and the females did better in the single-sex schools. And so then we looked at self-esteem, and for this was significant for the females. So you can see that the single-sex females had higher self-esteem than the co-ed females. And this was what we expected, and it had been what previous research found as well. And then with achievement motivation, the stars are the significant. So males had in co-ed schools, and females in the single-sex schools had higher achievement motivation than females in the co-ed schools. So here are the 2 high ones, and here's the low one, and the males in the single-sex schools wasn't significant. And then intrinsic motivation, we found that the boys in co-ed schools and the girls in single-sex schools had higher intrinsic motivation than the males in single-sex schools. So you can see the stars there as well. And then finally, the kind of most important thing here is looking at the desire to enter science fields, co-ed versus single-sex schools for girls and boys. And what we actually found was that there wasn't a significant difference. Girls in single-sex and co-ed schools were just as likely to want to enter the physical sciences. This is what we're looking at here for the STEM. And so there wasn't a significant difference, actually, between the girls. So that was interesting. So then we actually took this to DC this spring with the Posters on the Hill program with the Council on Undergraduate Research. And this is Hannah and I. I think Hannah's over there. And this is us in the Rayburn building presenting our results. And we also spoke with some Congress people. And then I also tried calling some representatives, but I'll tell you about that in a second. So basically, we're doing science research, but there's so much science research that, anything almost what Dan's study is, and a lot of the studies here today are basically science research. So, okay, we found these things. This is important. So science, Congress, they're every day making decisions about issues that are very related to science. Anything like, this is on the next slide, climate change, healthcare, education, beginning and end of life issues. These are all so related to science. But the thing is, there are only 5 PhDs in basic science in all of Congress, which is less than 1%. So even if we find these things, who's going to understand these presentations? For this presentation that I'm doing right now to actually get to a congressperson, it's going to have to go through probably like 3 news sources. So I tried calling one of these PhDs in science. These are the 5, and they're all representatives. They're in the House of Representatives. They're not senators, so that makes them, their terms are shorter. They kind of have some different priorities maybe than listening to an undergrad. And the other thing is that if none of them are from Nebraska. So I called and they would say, oh, are you from our district? No? Oh, sorry, we don't have time to talk to you. And this is not like the congressperson. This is their legislative assistant, which they have, so many of. And they don't even have time to hear what I have to say. And these are the only people that can understand what we're finding out here. So, and all of Congress, there are only 92 women, and 3 of them have a Bachelor of Science degree, a bachelor's. So this is just like shocking to me. So, you know, this is my interest. I'm interested in science policy and how does Congress find out about these things? So basically, one of the really outspoken scientists in Congress, Vern Ehlers, has written a lot of articles, and U.S. News and World Report interviewed him, and this was the name of the article, Why Congress Needs More Scientists. But basically, this is what he's been talking about, both because scientists in Congress, they'll be able to understand these issues, and then he says he's just like totally swamped by people who are asking him, can you just kind of explain this, because I don't really get it. So they understand it, they can explain it to the other people around them, and it's also about the approach that you have to issues. Like, a scientist has a way of thinking. It's very analytical, and that's something that we need when we're looking at the issues that Congress is looking at. And then finally, they'd just be in touch with general scientific advancements. So those are the two parts of my presentation. Basically, maybe my results didn't say that we need to have more single-sex schools so girls can go into science, but even if they didn't, having higher self-esteem, those kinds of things, they do tell us important things about the education system. But then, what is the potential for legislative response? Well, it's not really huge right now. So that's kind of what I found, what I've spent some time on. And here are my references. And I wanted to thank, first of all, Dr. Cherney, because she's been with me for so long, and we've worked so hard together and worked through this, and she's really helped me figure out, I'm interested in so many things, how can I tie them together? So thank you so much for your guidance. And also the psychology department and the honors program, both of them have funded this research. And also, I actually didn't get one of the grants this summer. I wasn't working the summer on it, but someone previously did. So thank you very much. Questions?
Would you say that a psychologist is a scientist and not a
Yeah, I think so.
Kind of going along with that, did you happen to know off the top of your head how many women in Congress have a Bachelor of Arts degree?
No, I don't.
Because isn't the psychology degree a BA?
Yeah. Well, most universities is right now. Yeah, so that's a good point.
I wanted to say that as a father of having sent my daughter through an all-girls school for 8 years, I've heard my heart is warmed by the findings here. And it occurs to me that there are a fair number of high schools that would love to see this and put it in their marketing literature, et cetera. But you mentioned something earlier on about having been involved with research over a period of time, and it occurred to me that one of the features that is behind a lot of these presentations are participations by students prior to this kind of event occurring, namely, looking over someone's shoulder at one point in time, then maybe helping out with the study at another. And as you gave reference to somebody who actually did some previous work in this area, kind of piggybacking on some of those kinds of things. Would you like to talk a little bit about your experience in that process of acquiring skills?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Dr. Trini picked me up as a freshman, and I think this is probably the experience of many people. You start out kind of doing like just the busy work, kind of entering data and stuff, and you think, oh my gosh, this is nothing. But the thing is, you're learning about kind of the data that you're going to need to collect. And if you hadn't done that, you wouldn't be able to say, okay, I'm going to need to look at this, I'm going to need to look at that. So that's a big part of the process, is like just the beginning that kind of looking over someone's shoulder, like you said. And the collaboration is just unbelievable. I mean, there are so many people who have been part of the brainstorming just on this project that I couldn't have done it without a lot of people in this room in Dr. Trini's research program. So it's just, I could never have done this a few years ago, but it's my experience of starting young and entering data, and then kind of like, how do I present something, and presenting it, and kind of getting more familiar with that because of the guidance of others that I'm able to be here. So absolutely, it's definitely a process.
I also want to say that Kaitlin is not a member of the Creighton psychology department, so she's doing that outside of her expertise.
Kaitlin, thanks for